Now we're on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. Shema, we have a third derivation from Rabbi Yochanan. Yesh dichu b'domim. Well, this is a very interesting halacha that if, let's say, there are two kedushos to an animal, as far as hegdesh is concerned, you could have kedusha as domim, where you magdish it lebedek habayis and only its value on the market, and you could be poded and then take the money and buy another carbon, and so forth and so on. And you have kedusha guf, which doesn't lend itself to pidyon. So let's say that you had something that's only Kodesh B'Kedushas Damim. Would we still apply the principle of Dichui? And the answer is yes. Because when the first partner was Magdish half the animal, and half the animal is not fit for a carbon, so it can't be Kodesh B'Kedushas Haguf. It only can be Kodesh B'Kedushas Damim, and its monetary value is sanctified. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan rules that an animal like this can never again be bought as on the Mizbeach. So we see that the halach of Dichui, which rejects it from the Mizbeach completely and permanently, applies even to an animal that's original Akdosh was only for Damim. Now, once the Gemara picks up the halach of Damim, Omar Ula, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Achal Chelev V'Hifresh Karban, what happens if after being guilty of eating chelev v'shogeg, he then was mafresh carbon, and then he did something that would make it impossible for him to bring that carbon as a carbon chatos? What happened? Hamir das, right? He became a mumar, and a mumar cannot bring a carbon. We will not accept a carbon from a mumar. A mumar is somebody who rebels against the entire Torah. Chazarbo, now he did tshuva, and he wants to bring that carbon that he was mafresh before he became a mumar, is whole v'nidcha nidcha. He cannot bring that carbon. That carbon was rejected because the gavra was not roy to a carbon while he was a mumar, even though now he is roy for a carbon. Itmar nami, here's another halacha, and the Gemara is going to try to see why we need both. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ochal chelev hifresh carbon v'nishtate. He became insane. And at that point, he couldn't bring the carbon, so it was nidcha. V'chaz v'nishtapa, even though now he already is back to his sanity, can't bring the carbon. Why hold the nidcha yidcha? So the Gemara wants to know, tzricha, why do we need both halachas? Diashminik ha'mais, if we only had Rabbi Yochanan in the case of a mumar, mishum dehu dachi nafshi biyadayim. He did something to make himself into a mumar. And therefore, it really disqualifies the carbon in the most profound way, and that's called dichu. But here, in the case of the shtata, he didn't bring it upon himself. He became disqualified as a matter of the passage of time, we'll call it. Is kiyashin dami. Would you say that a person who falls asleep and can't bring the carbon because he's sleeping, and therefore when he wakes up, he won't be able to bring the carbon because it's dachli? Obviously not. That's not dachli. And I would have thought that nishtat is like Yasha, and therefore it's not dachli, kamash malon. No. And if he had told me the case of nishtat, mishum di'ein v'yoda lachsa, it's a very profound dichui, because he doesn't have the wherewithal to bring himself back to qualify if he's insane. But here in the case of mumar, nasa mumar, di'esh b'yoda lachsa, he has it in his hands to do tshuva and reinstate himself as being kosher to bring a carbon. I might think that in such a case we don't apply the principle of dichui. Hamash malan, that even so, tzricha, we needed that even in this case is dichui. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah achal chelev v'hifresh carbon. V'horu bezdin shechelev muter. Bezdin issued an erroneous ruling that you're allowed to eat chelev. Now at that point, there's no carbon. You can't bring a carbon for that which is not an avera at all, because what he ate chelev, according to the ruling of the Bezdin, was permissible. Chazru bahem, now Bezdin rescinds their original mistaken, erroneous psak, and they say, no, for eating chelev, you have to bring a carbon. Mao, what's the di? Mi avi dichui? Sure, we say it's dichui. I love dichui, maybe it's not dichui. And why would you say that it's not dichui? Because the whole thing was just a mistake to begin with. There was no real permanent status that he was parted from the carbon. It was nidche. Amalei Saba, some elderly person said, a scholar apparently to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Ki pasach Rabbi Yochanan b'dechuyim meha pasach. I'm going to tell you that when Rabbi Yochanan presented his shir, his discussion, his presentation about Dichui, he would start with this case where Bezdin made a mistake and they were Mora Hora that you're allowed to eat Chelev. My timer. Why would Rabbi Yochanan have begun the kickoff of his presentation at Dichui with this case of Horu Bezdin? Because usually you start, when you present a new theory or new halachos, you start with the easiest case first. So why is this ruling with regard to Horu Bezdin B'tos and they were matir Chelev? Why is that demonstrate Dichui better than the other two cases that we had? And the Gemara says Hasam Gavra Idchi Korban Lo Idchi. In the case of a Mumar or a Shota, it's the Gavra who is Dachui. But there was no reason why the carbon per se should be possible. It wasn't rejected apostle. It's the Gavra that's possible. This is like Reb Chaim, Gavra Chefta. But Hacha here, in the case of Bezdin that ruled it, then Karbanami, the carbon itself is rejected, is disqualified because he didn't eat anything that was awesome. Bezdin said he ate that which is mutter. Okay, now we get back to the Mishnah. Omar Shim ben Azim mikublani b'pishivim ushnayim zkenim. That only a carbon that can be eaten is kosher shalol lishma, but an ola which cannot be eaten is pasul shalol lishma. Lama leila misnei shivim ushnayim zkenim. Why is it should have said zkenim in the plural? It says zakeim. The kula b'chada shitos avikam. It indicates and demonstrates that they were all 72 on the same page. They all agreed. Lahosif ben Azai ela ola. Amar Avuna my time in the ben Azai ola hu ishay reach nichach Hashem. The extra word who, which we read as he, because ola is nekeva. He lishma kshera. If it was done for the sake of ola, then it's kosher. Shalol lishma psula. Frek the Gemara Osham nami ksiv behu. And even though Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that Asham Shalol Lishma is possible, but Azai is with the Rabbanon that Shalol Lishma and Karban Asham is kosher. Why not derive from who that Shalol Lishma is possible? And the answer is because who that pasuk in Karban Asham is Liachar Aktar Seimurim Hidichsiv. That pasuk of who is brought after he was maktir on the Mizbech. It says Vehiktir also Makoin Mizbecha Ish Hashem Asham Hu. And we know that Haktaras Heimurim is after the Zrika, and it doesn't have any impact on the kashrus of the carbon and its ability to be mechap to be meratza. And therefore, since I have the word Ahu in a way that cannot be, cannot derive any conclusion about Shalol Lishma because it's after Haktaras Heimurim, then for sure I can't use Hai. Guess what? If we go back to the parsha of Ola, where it says vehikriv vakerev kra'ayim yirchatz b'mayim vehikriv hakonis hakol vehikter hamizbecha. It's after Haktaras Haimurim, and then it says Olahi. The answer is trey hu ksiv. The word who appears twice. All right, so I only have the pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Aleph, but there's also pasuk in Shmos, Perek Chav Tes. Oh, here it is. Vehiktarta es kol ha'aylam mizbecha olahu Hashem. And again, the word who. Oh, also it says here, Reach nichochi shel Hashem hu. Again, a who. Okay, so Ben Azai is going to derive from the repetition of the word who that Ola Shalol Lishma is possible. Frek the Gemara Gabi Osham Nami Trey Hu Ksivi, because it says the Hiktir Osam, that's in Vayikra Zayin, Osham Hu, and in Vayikra Ches, or maybe it's a Hey, I can't exactly tell you, Osham Hu, again the word Hu. So why not derive from the extra word Hu that an Osham Shalol Lishma is possible? And as we said before, Ben Azai was not on board with Rabbi Lazar as far as an Asham is concerned to say Shalol Lishma is possible. And therefore the Gemara offers another another source from Ben Azai. Ela Ben Azai kal v'chomer ma'isila. Uma chatos shein kolil chatos Shalol Lishma psula. My chatos relative to Asham is kal. Relative to Ola is kal. Because chatos is eaten with Zichre Kahuna. And for deswegen, even despite the kula of Karma Chatos, nevertheless, Shalol Lishma is possible, is Ola, which is more Chomer, Shu Kolil, Lo Kol Shkein, how much more so should it be possible, Shalol Lishma, that's Ben Azai. So Gemara says, I don't get it. Malachata Shekein Mechaperes. You can't derive any conclusions to Ola from Chatos. Chatos is much more Chomer because Chatos comes to be Mechaper on a Chet. So maybe the Torah was more Machmer in Shalol Lishma. Pesach Yochid. Pesach is not brought for the sake of atonement. There's no kapara in the Korban Pesach. And nevertheless, if you shechted Shalol Lishma, it's possible. So if we take Chatos and add it to Korban Pesach, we can't take Pesach itself because Mal Pesach Shkein Smano Kavua, the Chumrah of Pesach is that it has a very limited fixed time. Chatas Tochiyah doesn't have a fixed time. You can bring a Chatas all year round. It's Chazar Din, Lo Reizeh, Reizeh, and we have Lo Reizeh, Reizeh means a Sada Shavash event, Shekain Kodshim, Ushchatem, Shalol Lishma Pasal, Afani Avi Ola, Shei Kodshim, Ushchatem Shalol Lishma Psul. So here I have a question which I couldn't find anyone answer. What about Shlomim? Right? Shlomim should also be derived from this same Tzad Shava because it's Kodshim and Shalol Lishma is possible. Now, I agree, I admit that Ola is more Chomer than Shlomim, but nevertheless, if we could derive the Psul of Shalol Lishma in Ola from the Tzad Shava of Chatos and Pesach, why can't we do the same thing with regard to Shlomim? I guess because Shlomim is Kodshim Kalim. No. Pesach is also Kodshim Kalim. Okay, so that's a question that I had. The Gemara has a different question. Which means that Chatos comes to be Mechaper on a Kores, and a Korban Pesach, if you don't bring it, you're Chayav Kores. But keep in mind that these two Chiyuvei Kores are totally different one from the other, and therefore Ben Azai, turning to Daf Yud Gimel, Tzad Kores Lo Parach. He doesn't have this Pirch of Tzad Kores because you're dealing with two different issues and creases. So if Ben Chama is deriving from a Tzad Shava between Chatos and Pesach, why doesn't he derive that a Korban Osham likewise should be possible for Shechted Shalol Lishma? Because Ben Azai derived Ola Shalol Lishma, why didn't he derive Asham Shalol Lishma, which again is Shitas Rebbe Lazar, but we're holding now that Ben Azai agrees with the Chachamim that Shalol Lishma and Asham is kosher. And the Gemara says Asham Parach, meaning even after the Tzad Shova of Chatos and Pesach, you still have a pircha on that Bamei Tzad regarding Asham. Why? Sheken Yeshna B'tzibur Kibiyachid. That these two korbanos, namely Chatos and Pesach have a tzibur element to it. Asham could never come with tzibur. So if the Torah was machmir in those karbonos that could come with tzibur that shalol lishma apostles them, for example, Pesach and Chatos, you can't derive any conclusions from that side of Shaveh to Asham. Now you have to add one point over here that Pesach is not a korban tzibur. It's just that everybody brings their Pesach on the 14th. It's like a korban tzibur. That has to be taken under advice. Ibois Ema, Sad Kor is Nami Parav. Now the Gemara retracts its original position in explaining Ben Azai. It holds that actually the Tzad HaShavah would not be operative to derive Ola because both Chatos and Pesach have a Tzad Kores. Ben Azai Gemara Gmirole. Ben Azai understood based on Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, an oral tradition that goes back to Har Sinai, that an Ola Shalol Lishma is possible. So again, the fact that Ben Azai was quoting the 72 Zkanim means it was Halacha L'Moshe Messina that's called Hilchus Gemirle, and an Ola Shalol Lishma is possible. Rav Huna, was doing, somersaults in the air in order to prove Ben Azai based on a Kavachomer, that he only did L'Chidudei Talmud B'Yad. Very often the Gemara says that sometimes the Amoraim would try to sharpen up the minds of the Talmidim and they would offer them a logical dissection analysis, but it wasn't really necessary. It wasn't the source of the halacha. And that leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Yud Gimel. So with that, I'll wish you a wonderful Shabbos Shuvah. We should be zocher to do tshuva and to be written, inscribed in the book of life, book of happiness, book of peace, book of Torah, Daf Yomi, of course, Kedi Ratzon, Amen.